Pilot lectures black woman about flight etiquette. Minutes later, she grounds him permanently. A groundbreaking pilot walks into the bustling terminal of a major airport, her confidence built on years of experience and countless skies conquered. But her undeniable skill and authority are overshadowed by a pilot who assumes she doesn't belong. His condescending remarks and outright dismissal spark a confrontation that will forever change his career and his understanding of true leadership. What unfolds next is more than just a clash of egos. It's a story of courage, accountability, and the fight for respect in the face of prejudice. At 35,000 feet, a lesson is delivered that no one on board will ever forget. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you enjoy stories about resilience, empowerment, and justice, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more incredible tales like this one. Now, let's get started. The Boeing 787 shuddered as it sliced through a sudden pocket of turbulence. The vibrations rattled the overhead compartments, eliciting a few startled gasps from the cabin. Inside the cockpit, Captain Maya Johnson's hands remained steady on the controls, her voice a beacon of calm as she addressed the passengers through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've hit a patch of turbulence, but there's nothing to worry about. Please stay seated and keep your seatbelts fastened. We'll have you cruising smoothly again in just a moment." She flipped off the mic and glanced at the co-pilot seat, currently occupied by Captain Brian Miller. His jaw was tight, his eyes darting nervously between the blinking lights on the instrument panel. Maya had seen this look before, not from him, but from other pilots who underestimated her competence because of her gender or the color of her skin. She pushed those thoughts aside. This wasn't the time. "We'll adjust our altitude by 2,000 feet, she said, her tone confident and controlled. "That should stabilize us." Brian hesitated, his hand hovering over the panel. "Are you sure that's the best call? The forecast didn't mention turbulence at this level." Maya suppressed a sigh. "The instruments don't lie, Captain Miller. I've handled similar conditions before. Trust me, this is the safest course of action." Instead of responding, Brian adjusted his headset and leaned back in his seat. It wasn't outright defiance, but it was close enough to irk her. She'd worked hard to get here, 15 years of relentless dedication, countless hours of training, and endless battles against prejudice in an industry dominated by men. She wasn't about to let a little turbulence, or Brian's ego, throw her off course. Meanwhile, in the cabin, Sharon Davis adjusted her scarf and moved gracefully down the aisle, offering reassuring smiles to passengers gripping their armrests. With 30 years of experience as a flight attendant, Sharon had seen it all, from unruly travelers to near emergencies. Today, she felt something unusual in the air, and it wasn't just the turbulence. Her gaze landed on Captain Maya Johnson as she emerged briefly from the cockpit to communicate with the head flight attendant. To Sharon, Maya was a force of nature, a symbol of progress. Sharon often compared her to Bessie Coleman, the first African-American woman to hold a pilot's license. Maya wasn't just a pilot, she was a trailblazer. As Maya returned to the cockpit, Sharon's thoughts were interrupted by a low voice. "They sure let anyone fly planes these days, huh?" Sharon turned to see an older passenger, Thomas Caldwell, leaning slightly into the aisle. His tone wasn't mocking, but carried a weight of curiosity. His weathered face bore the lines of someone who had seen combat, and his veteran cap confirmed it. "Captain Johnson is one of the best," Sharon said firmly, meeting his gaze. "We're lucky to have her." Thomas nodded slowly. "I've heard of her. A fighter, that one. Reminds me of someone I knew in '68. Can't remember her name now, but she had the same fire in her eyes." Sharon smiled, appreciating the support. "She's got that fire all right. We're in good hands." Back in the cockpit, the turbulence subsided as Maya's calculated adjustment took effect. The plane steadied, and the tension in the air lifted slightly. Maya allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction, but it faded as she glanced at Brian. "Good call," he muttered, almost begrudgingly. "Thanks," Maya replied, her tone neutral. She didn't need his validation, but she'd take it for what it was worth. As the plane cruised at its new altitude, Maya checked the systems and ran a routine diagnostic. Everything seemed normal, but her gut told her to stay alert. Flying was as much about instinct as it was about skill, and right now her instincts were tingling. She glanced at Brian, who was tapping something into the flight management system. "Captain Miller," she began, keeping her voice professional. "We'll need to start planning our descent soon. Weather reports indicate some crosswinds near the approach." Brian looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Understood. I'll handle it." There it was again, that subtle undertone, as if he needed to remind her he was capable. Maya bit back a retort. This wasn't the time for ego clashes. Their responsibility was to the passengers and crew, nothing else. As the minutes passed, a faint unease settled over the cockpit. Maya couldn't pinpoint why, but something didn't feel right. She double-checked the readings, ensuring every detail was accounted for. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the nagging sensation remained. From the cabin, Sharon stepped into the cockpit, a hint of worry in her usually composed demeanor. "Captain, a passenger reported hearing a strange noise near the rear of the plane. I thought you'd want to know." Maya frowned, her mind immediately cataloging potential issues. "What kind of noise?" "Like a faint whistling," Sharon said. "Could be nothing, but it's better to check." Maya nodded. "Thank you, Sharon. We'll look into it." She turned to Brian. "Run a system check on the rear compartments. I'll monitor the cabin pressure levels." Brian hesitated, his hand pausing over the controls, but then complied. As they worked, the uneasy feeling in Maya's chest deepened. She didn't know it yet, but this flight was about to test her limits in ways she'd never imagined. The turbulence was gone, but the tension remained, an invisible weight pressing on everyone aboard. Thomas Caldwell sat quietly, his mind replaying distant memories of missions long past. Sharon moved through the aisles, her trained eyes scanning for any signs of distress. And in the cockpit, Maya and Brian worked in uneasy silence, the storm outside replaced by a different kind of turbulence within. The symphony of the skies was far from over. The gentle hum of the engines filled the cabin, a soothing rhythm that masked the tension brewing beneath the surface. From the outside, the Boeing 787 soared smoothly through the sky, but inside, an invisible unease hung heavy. In the cockpit, Captain Maya Johnson sat upright in her seat, her eyes scanning the instrument panel with a laser focus. Despite the steadiness of the plane, the report of a strange noise near the rear compartments lingered in her mind like a faint, unwelcome echo. "Anything unusual showing up on your end, Brian?" she asked, her voice calm but tinged with curiosity. Brian Miller didn't look up, his hands moving across the flight management system with mechanical precision. "Nothing out of the ordinary so far, probably just cabin noises. Passengers get jumpy over nothing sometimes." His tone carried a mix of dismissal and impatience. Maya resisted the urge to sigh. "Let's not assume. Safety isn't something we gamble with." Brian gave a slight shrug, the tension in his shoulders betraying his irritation. Maya's calm demeanor didn't falter. She'd dealt with skeptics before, pilots, technicians, and managers who underestimated her. It wasn't personal. It was systemic. But today she had no time for ego battles. She had a plane to fly. In the cabin, Sharon Davis moved with practiced ease, her keen eyes sweeping over the passengers. Decades of experience as a flight attendant had given her an instinct for trouble, and today her instincts were whispering louder than usual. A young couple whispered anxiously in one row, while an elderly woman gripped her armrest with white-knuckled intensity. Sharon leaned down to offer a warm smile. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" The woman hesitated, her voice quivering. "That noise? I don't remember hearing anything like it before. Is it safe?" Sharon's smile didn't waver. "You're perfectly safe. Captain Johnson is one of the best, and she's keeping everything under control." The woman nodded, visibly reassured. Sharon continued her journey down the aisle until she reached Thomas Caldwell. The veteran had his arms crossed, his sharp eyes following Sharon's every move. When she met his gaze, he raised an eyebrow. "You're worried about something," he said in a gravelly voice. "What's going on?" Sharon hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "One of the passengers reported a noise near the rear compartment. The captain's looking into it." Thomas nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Sounds like something loose, maybe worse. You need me back there?" Sharon chuckled softly, appreciating his offer. "Not yet, Mr. Caldwell, but thanks for the vote of confidence." "Just saying," he replied. "Loose ends get dangerous at 30,000 feet. Back in the cockpit, Maya couldn't shake the gnawing sense that something was off. The turbulence earlier had subsided, but the nagging report of the whistling noise refused to leave her thoughts. She tapped a few buttons, pulling up a diagnostic readout for the rear compartments. Everything appeared normal, yet her instincts told her otherwise. "Brian," she said, her voice sharper this time. "Double-check the diagnostic systems on the rear cargo hold. Something isn't adding up." Brian exhaled audibly, but complied, his fingers tapping at the controls. "Everything looks fine on my end," he said, though his tone carried less certainty than before. Maya leaned forward, her gaze narrowing on a faint fluctuation in the pressure gauge. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there. "Pressure levels are stable, but I want to test something. Depressurize the rear cargo hold briefly, just enough to see if the sound changes." Brian turned to her, his expression skeptical. "You really think that's necessary?" "Do it," she replied firmly. "Better safe than sorry." Brian hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. As he adjusted the pressure controls, the faint whistling noise abruptly stopped, replaced by a low, grinding sound that sent a chill down Maya's spine. "Stop the adjustment," she ordered immediately. Brian complied, his face now mirroring her concern. "What the hell was that?" Maya didn't answer. Her mind raced, cataloging possibilities. A mechanical failure? A loose component? Sabotage? Whatever it wasn't normal. Sharon reached the rear of the plane, her steps deliberate and quiet. She paused near the compartment door, pressing her ear against it. The grinding noise had subsided, but a faint vibration remained. She pressed her palm against the panel, feeling the subtle tremor beneath her fingertips. Turning to a nearby passenger, Sharon offered her trademark reassuring smile. "Everything's fine, sir. We're just taking extra precautions." The man nodded hesitantly, but Sharon's confidence seemed to settle him. She tapped her headset. "Captain, the sound stopped after the adjustment, but I'm still feeling a slight vibration in the panel." "Understood," Maya replied, her tone professional but clipped. "Return to your station. We're escalating this." As Sharon moved back toward the front of the cabin, Thomas Caldwell caught her eye again. "Miss Davis," he said quietly, "something's not sitting right here. If you need help, don't hesitate." "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," Sharon said, her voice warm but focused. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." In the cockpit, Maya leaned back slightly, her mind working overtime. The grinding noise was gone, but the mystery remained unsolved. She glanced at Brian, who was typing furiously into the flight management system. "Cross-check every maintenance log for this plane," she instructed. "Anything that seems out of place, flag it." Brian gave a curt nod, his earlier resistance replaced by quiet determination. Maya appreciated the shift, even if it was overdue. Outside, the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting golden hues across the sky. The serene exterior belied the tension simmering within. Somewhere in the unseen recesses of the plane, a potential danger lurked, waiting to be uncovered. Sharon resumed her post near the galley, her eyes scanning the cabin. Most passengers appeared calm, but she knew better than to trust appearances. Thomas Caldwell gave her a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgment of their unspoken alliance. In the cockpit, Maya's jaw tightened as she reviewed the data once more. "We're missing something," she muttered under her breath. The Boeing 787 cruised steadily through the sky, but Maya knew this was only the beginning. A storm was brewing, not in the air around them, but within the unseen mechanics of the aircraft itself. And Maya, with her unshakable instincts, was determined to uncover the truth before it was too late. The hum of the engines provided a deceptive sense of calm as Captain Maya Johnson sat in the cockpit, her fingers hovering over the controls. The faint grinding noise from earlier had disappeared, but it lingered in her thoughts like an unwelcome echo. Something wasn't right, and her instincts refused to let it go. "Brian, anything unusual from the maintenance logs?" Maya asked, her voice steady yet tinged with urgency. Brian Miller frowned at the screen, scrolling through the data. "No flags. Last inspection was marked routine. Everything cleared." Maya pressed her lips together, her gaze fixed on the instrument panel. She trusted the systems, but she trusted her instincts more. "Pull the last 3 flight records. I want to cross-check them with this one." Brian let out a small groan. 3? Isn't that overkill? We're running diagnostics. Everything's fine." Maya turned toward him, her eyes unwavering. "We're responsible for 200 lives, Brian. There's no such thing as overkill." With a reluctant shrug, Brian began typing. Maya could feel his skepticism, but there was no time to indulge his doubt. Her gut told her they were missing something critical, and she wasn't about to take chances. In the cabin, Sharon Davis moved down the aisle, her practiced smile masking the subtle tension in her posture. Decades of experience had taught her to read people, and today she could sense the unease spreading among the passengers. Her eyes scanned for anyone who seemed particularly nervous. Stopping by an elderly woman gripping her armrest, Sharon leaned down with a warm smile. "Everything all right, ma'am?" The woman hesitated, her voice trembling. "That noise earlier, it wasn't normal, was it? Is it safe?" Sharon kept her smile steady. "You're perfectly safe. Captain Johnson is one of the best, and she's got everything under control." The woman's grip relaxed slightly, reassured by Sharon's confidence. As Sharon continued her rounds, she noticed Thomas Caldwell watching her. The veteran's sharp eyes and relaxed demeanor stood out in contrast to the other passengers. "You're on edge," Thomas said quietly as she approached. "What's really going on?" Sharon hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying. "A passenger reported a strange noise near the rear. The captain's looking into it, but so far, nothing critical." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Noise like that could mean something's loose. Loose is dangerous at 30,000 feet. Sharon gave a small chuckle, appreciating his insight. "Captain Johnson's thorough. If there's something wrong, she'll find it." Back in the cockpit, Maya's unease grew. "Brian," she called, her tone sharper now. "Check the rear cargo hold again. Something isn't adding up." Brian's fingers moved over the keyboard, his expression showing growing irritation. "Diagnostics still look fine. Everything's normal." Normal doesn't explain a grinding noise, Maya muttered, leaning forward to scrutinize the instrument panel. Her eyes landed on a faint fluctuation in the pressure gauge, barely noticeable, but persistent enough to confirm her suspicions. "Depressurize the rear hold briefly," she ordered. "Let's see if we can isolate the issue." Brian hesitated. "You really think that's necessary?" "I know. Just do it." Brian complied, muttering under his breath as he made the adjustments. Moments later, the faint grinding noise returned, louder this time. It reverberated through the cockpit, sending a chill down Maya's spine. "Stop the adjustment," Maya snapped. Brian obeyed, his face pale. "That's not good." "No, it's not," Maya agreed, her mind racing. "Sharon, report to the cockpit," she called into the intercom. Sharon reached the rear of the cabin, her eyes narrowing as she examined the compartment door. Pressing her hand against it, she felt a faint vibration, subtle yet unnatural. She tapped her headset. "Captain, the noise stopped briefly, but I'm still feeling a vibration in the panel. Could be structural." Maya's voice came through, calm but decisive. "Understood. Return to your station and keep the passengers reassured." As Sharon walked back toward the galley, Thomas Caldwell stopped her with a quiet word. "Miss Davis, you've got that look. If you need another set of eyes or ears, don't hesitate." "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," Sharon replied, her voice warm but focused. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." Maya reviewed the data on her screen, piecing together the clues, the grinding noise, the pressure fluctuation, and now the vibration in the rear compartment. Her gut screamed sabotage, but she needed proof. "Brian, cross-check the maintenance roster. I want to know who worked on this plane before takeoff." Brian blinked, his skepticism fading into concern. "You think someone tampered with it?" "I don't think," Maya said, her tone grim. "But I'm not ruling it out." As the external cameras scanned the aircraft, a faint shimmer caught Maya's attention. "There," she said, pointing at the monitor. "Starboard wing. Zoom in." Brian complied, and the screen revealed a loose access hatch, slightly ajar. Maya's stomach clenched. An unsecured hatch at this altitude was a disaster waiting to happen. "Contact ground control," Maya ordered. "We're initiating an emergency descent." In the cabin, Sharon made her way back to the galley, her tone calm as she addressed the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're taking precautionary measures to ensure your safety. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." The announcement settled over the cabin like a thin veil of calm. Sharon knelt beside the young boy who had reported the light earlier. "You've been a great helper," she said with a smile. "You keep being brave, okay?" The boy nodded, his fear replaced by a small sense of pride. "I will." As the Boeing 787 began its controlled descent, Maya gripped the controls, her focus razor-sharp. The shimmering access hatch on the monitor confirmed her worst fears. This wasn't a routine mechanical issue, it was deliberate. "Brian," Maya said quietly, her tone steel. "Pull up the flight history for this plane. I want every detail." Brian nodded, his earlier hesitation replaced by professional determination. "Got it." In the cabin, Sharon maintained order, her calm demeanor reassuring passengers. Thomas Caldwell watched her closely, his expression unreadable but alert. "Your captain," he said softly as she passed. "She's sharp. She'll figure this out." Sharon nodded, her confidence unshaken. "I know she will." As the ground drew closer, the weight of the unknown pressed on everyone aboard. Maya's instincts had carried them this far, but she knew the real challenge was yet to come. This wasn't just turbulence, it was a storm brewing, one she was determined to navigate through. Chapters The Boeing 787 descended steadily, the engines humming a controlled rhythm that belied the tension gripping everyone aboard. In the cockpit, Captain Maya Johnson's hands moved deftly over the controls, her every motion deliberate and precise. The shimmering image of the loose access hatch replayed in her mind like a warning sign she couldn't ignore. "Ground control has cleared our emergency landing," Brian Miller announced, his tone noticeably less skeptical now. "Runway 3 is ready, and emergency crews are on standby." Maya nodded, her focus unshaken. "Good. Let's coordinate descent speeds and approach vectors. I want this landing as smooth as possible. No surprises." Brian didn't argue. For the first time since they'd taken off, his tone carried respect rather than resistance. Maya didn't have time to relish the shift. Her priority was getting the plane and everyone on board safely to the ground. In the cabin, Sharon Davis moved methodically through the aisles, checking seatbelts and offering calm reassurance to passengers. Most people responded with nods, though their tight grips on armrests betrayed their nerves. She stopped at Thomas Caldwell's row, and the veteran looked up at her with a calm but knowing expression. "This is one of those stay calm, everything's fine moments, isn't it?" he asked. Sharon smiled, appreciating his candor. "That's the goal. Captain Johnson's got this under control." Thomas leaned back, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I believe you. But this isn't your average emergency, is it?" Sharon hesitated, then nodded. "It's not routine, no, but she's the best at what she does." "Good," Thomas said simply, "because sometimes the difference between life and death is having the right person in charge." Sharon squeezed his arm briefly before continuing her rounds. Her next stop was the young boy who had first spotted the glint on the wing. He sat quietly, holding his mother's hand, but his wide eyes scanned the window as if searching for another clue. "You've been very brave," Sharon said gently, crouching to his level. "We're almost there. Just keep sitting tight, all right?" The boy nodded, his small face lighting up with pride. "I helped, right?" "You absolutely did," Sharon said warmly. "You helped the captain make a very important decision." In the cockpit, the tension was palpable. Maya kept her eyes fixed on the instruments, her mind racing through the possibilities. A loose access hatch could be catastrophic, but the grinding noise from earlier still gnawed at her. It wasn't just a mechanical issue. Something about it felt deliberate. "Brian, how's the approach looking?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Vector's clean," Brian replied. "Winds are minimal. Conditions are ideal." "Good," Maya said. "Keep monitoring the starboard wing cameras. If that hatch shifts during descent, I need to know immediately." Brian nodded, his previous doubt replaced by quiet determination. Maya could feel the change in him. He wasn't questioning her judgment anymore. He was following it. As the descent continued, Maya toggled the intercom to address the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Johnson. We're beginning our approach for an unscheduled landing at Denver International Airport. This is a precautionary measure to ensure your safety. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Thank you for your cooperation." In the cabin, Sharon could feel the passengers' tension spike despite Maya's calm tone. She walked back to the galley, taking a moment to steady herself before resuming her duties. Thomas Caldwell caught her eye again as she passed. "Your captain's got nerves of steel," he said quietly. "I've seen men break under less." "She's exceptional," Sharon agreed, her voice filled with quiet pride. Thomas leaned forward slightly. "If you need an extra hand back here, don't hesitate." Sharon gave him a grateful nod, her professionalism intact, but her gratitude evident. The final moments of the descent were the most critical. Maya's hands gripped the yoke, her eyes darting between the instruments and the runway growing larger in the windshield. Brian kept a steady watch on the starboard wing, his voice steady as he relayed updates. "The hatch is holding," he said. "No signs of further movement." "Good," Maya replied. "Gear down." The plane shuddered slightly as the landing gear deployed, a normal vibration that still sent a wave of anxiety rippling through the cabin. Maya adjusted the flaps, her voice steady as she coordinated with ground control. "Approach vector clear," Brian confirmed. "We're aligned." Maya exhaled slowly. "Brace for landing." In the cabin, Sharon's voice rang out over the PA system. "Crew, take your seats. Passengers, please remain calm and seated. We're moments from landing." Thomas Caldwell's grip tightened on the armrest, but his face remained calm. The young boy near the window clutched his mother's hand, his eyes wide but unafraid. Sharon gave him an encouraging nod before strapping herself into the jump seat. The runway rushed up to meet them, the lights blurring into streaks as the plane made its final approach. Maya guided the aircraft with precision, her every movement calculated and smooth. The wheels touched down with a jolt, the cabin filling with the sound of screeching rubber and the engines reversing thrust. The plane decelerated steadily, the tension in the cockpit and cabin finally breaking as they slowed to a crawl. "Ground control, this is Flight 402, Maya said into her headset. "We've landed safely. Request immediate inspection and assistance." In the cabin, a wave of relief swept through the passengers. Some clapped, others simply exhaled deeply, the strain of the ordeal etched into their faces. Sharon unbuckled herself and immediately began checking on everyone. "You all right, Mr. Caldwell?" she asked as she passed Thomas's row. "Alive and kicking," he replied with a faint grin. "Your captain deserves a medal." "She'll settle for a safe plane," Sharon replied with a small smile. Sharon stopped by the young boy's row, crouching down to meet his gaze. "You were amazing," she said softly. "Thank you for being so brave." The boy beamed, his mother pulling him into a tight hug. In the cockpit, Maya leaned back in her seat, exhaling deeply for the first time in what felt like hours. Brian glanced at her, a new respect in his eyes. "You handled that like a pro," he said quietly. "Because I am one," Maya replied, her tone light but firm. "Let's see what the ground crew finds." As the engines powered down and the emergency crews approached, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The grinding noise, the loose hatch, it didn't add up. Somewhere in the mechanics of the plane, or perhaps in the intentions of those who'd worked on it, lay the answers she needed. The storm, she knew, had only just begun. Chatu? The runway lights receded into the distance as the Boeing 787 came to a complete stop. Inside the cockpit, Maya Johnson exhaled deeply, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. The tension of the emergency descent was beginning to lift, but the nagging questions about the loose access hatch and the grinding noise remained. "Ground crew is approaching," Brian said, his voice softer than before. He glanced at Maya with an unspoken acknowledgement of her leadership. That was impressive? Maya didn't reply immediately. She kept her gaze fixed on the runway ahead, her mind racing. "Let's wait for their assessment. Something about this doesn't sit right." Brian nodded, leaning back in his seat. For the first time since they had taken off, there was no hint of skepticism in his expression, only respect. In the cabin, Sharon Davis moved through the rows, checking on the passengers. Most had begun to relax, their expressions a mixture of relief and exhaustion. She stopped by Thomas Caldwell, who was watching her with his usual sharp gaze. "Well handled," Thomas said, his gravelly voice carrying a note of admiration. "Your captain's got a steady hand and nerves of steel." "She does," Sharon replied, her smile genuine. "We're lucky to have her." Thomas leaned back, his expression pensive. Reminds me of someone I knew back in '68, a chopper pilot named Helen Adams. She had that same fire in her eyes. Saved my life more than once. Sharon tilted her head, intrigued. A fellow soldier? Thomas nodded, his eyes distant. Yeah, we were in the thick of it during the Tet Offensive. She flew into hot zones no one else dared to, pulling out wounded soldiers under fire. Always said it wasn't bravery, just duty. He paused, his voice softening. Lost her on one of those missions. Her bird got hit before she could make it out. She was the kind of pilot you don't forget. Sharon absorbed his words, her respect for Maya growing even more. Sounds like she left quite a legacy. She did, Thomas said, his gaze steady. And from what I've seen, your captain's cut from the same cloth. Outside the plane, the ground crew worked swiftly, inspecting the exterior with flashlights and equipment. Maya and Brian stood near the open cockpit door, watching the activity below. Maya's sharp eyes tracked every movement, her mind cataloging possibilities. One of the technicians climbed the stairway and approached the cockpit. Captain Johnson, he began, his tone serious. We've confirmed the access hatch on the starboard wing was improperly secured. There's also evidence of tampering, tool marks near the fastenings. Maya's stomach dropped. Tampering? Are you certain? The technician nodded grimly. Yes, ma'am. This wasn't an accident. Brian let out a low whistle. So someone wanted this to happen. Maya's mind raced. The grinding noise, the unsecured hatch. It all pointed to deliberate sabotage. But who? And why? She straightened her shoulders, her expression hardening. Get me a full report as soon as possible, Maya instructed. I'll be coordinating with the airline security team. Yes, ma'am, the technician replied, before heading back down the stairway. Maya turned to Brian, her voice low. This isn't over, not by a long shot. Back in the cabin, Sharon continued her rounds, ensuring everyone was ready to disembark. As she reached Thomas Caldwell again, she noticed his thoughtful expression. You've got that look again, she said, half smiling. Thomas gestured toward the galley, where they could speak more privately. Once there, he leaned against the counter, his tone serious. Tampering on a plane like this isn't random. Someone had a reason. Sharon nodded. Captain Johnson's already looking into it. She won't let this slide. Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly. I've seen things like this before, people trying to send messages, test boundaries, or worse. If it's sabotage, it's deliberate, and it's dangerous. Sharon's stomach tightened, but she forced herself to remain calm. Do you think it could be connected to something bigger? Could be, Thomas said simply. Or it could be someone with a grudge. Either way, your captain's walking into a storm. Sharon gave him a small nod, her confidence in Maya unshaken. She can handle it. She always does. As the passengers began to disembark, Maya stayed near the cockpit, observing the activity outside. Brian stood beside her, his expression unreadable. You really think we'll get to the bottom of this? He asked. We have to, Maya replied firmly. If someone's willing to risk 200 lives to make a point, they won't stop here. Brian nodded slowly. For what it's worth? I'm glad you were in charge today. Maya glanced at him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. Thanks, Brian, but this isn't about me. It's about making sure this never happens again. As they watched the ground crew work, the weight of the day began to settle over them. But Maya knew there was no time for rest. The storm Thomas had hinted at was brewing, and she was determined to face it head on. The morning sun stretched across the horizon as the Boeing 787 sat dormant on the tarmac, flanked by emergency vehicles and ground crew. Maya Johnson leaned against the cockpit doorway, her eyes sharp as she surveyed the bustling scene outside. Every detail mattered now, Every movement could hold a clue to the mystery of what had gone wrong. "Captain Johnson, the initial findings are in." A voice interrupted her thoughts. The airline's head of security, Mark Turner, approached with a clipboard in hand. His face was tight, his expression serious. Maya nodded. "What do we have?" Mark glanced at his notes. The access hatch on the starboard wing was intentionally loosened. We've also identified tampering with the fastenings on one of the hydraulic lines. It's a miracle the plane held steady during descent. A cold chill ran down Maya's spine. "Sabotage confirmed, then?" "Yes," Mark confirmed. "We've started combing through maintenance records and personnel logs. Whoever did this knew exactly how to cause damage without raising alarms." Brian Miller stepped out of the cockpit, catching the tail end of the conversation. "This wasn't just a prank," he said grimly. "Someone was trying to send a message." Maya folded her arms, her mind racing. Or worse, they were testing us. Inside the terminal, passengers were escorted to a private lounge to rest and regroup. Sharon Davis remained with them, her presence a calming force amidst the uncertainty. She checked in with each row, offering smiles and reassurances that everything was under control. When she reached Thomas Caldwell, he gestured for her to sit. "You don't look like someone who believes everything is under control," he said, his voice low but steady. Sharon gave a wry smile. "I believe in Captain Johnson. That's enough for me." Thomas leaned forward, his weathered face thoughtful. "This kind of thing doesn't happen by accident. Someone wanted attention, and they were willing to risk lives to get it." "You've seen something like this before, haven't you?" Sharon asked, sensing the weight behind his words. "Not on a plane," Thomas replied, his tone grave. "But in the field, during my time in Vietnam. Sabotage was often used to test our response, to see how quickly we'd notice. It was rarely about the immediate damage. It was about sending a message or preparing for something bigger." Sharon's stomach tightened. "You think this is a test?" Thomas shrugged, his expression unreadable. "If it is, they'll escalate." Back on the tarmac, Maya and Mark reviewed the personnel roster. Names of maintenance workers scrolled across the screen, each one flagged with clearance levels and shifts worked. One name stood out. "Jacob Ellison," Mark said, tapping the screen. "He was assigned to the starboard wing during the last check, but get this, he didn't clock out after his shift ended." Maya's eyes narrowed. "Where is he now?" Mark shook his head. "We've contacted his supervisor. Apparently he hasn't shown up for work today. His phone's been turned off." "Convenient," Brian muttered. Maya straightened, her resolve hardening. "Find him. If he's involved, we need answers." Mark nodded. "We're on it." As the investigation deepened, Maya returned to the passengers. She found Sharon speaking quietly with Thomas near the lounge's edge. "How's everyone holding up?" Maya asked. Sharon nodded toward the passengers. "Nervous, but stable. Thomas here has been keeping everyone grounded." Maya offered Thomas a small smile. "Thank you. It's not easy to keep calm in situations like this." Thomas waved it off. "You've got bigger things to worry about, Captain. Just make sure this doesn't happen again." Maya appreciated his bluntness. It mirrored her own determination. "That's the plan." Hours later, as dusk began to fall, a breakthrough came. Mark Turner called Maya to the operations center. A team of analysts had traced Jacob Ellison's last known location to a motel just outside the city. Security footage showed him leaving the facility late the previous night, carrying what appeared to be a toolbox. "Local authorities are en route," Mark said. "We'll know more soon." Maya nodded, her expression grim. If Ellison's involved, he didn't act alone. Sabotage at this scale requires coordination. Mark agreed. "We've flagged potential associates. If this is part of a larger plot, We'll need to act fast." The day had been long, but Maya's focus didn't waver. As she prepared to brief her crew, her thoughts lingered on the unanswered questions. Why this flight? Why now? And most importantly, what would they do next? Her instincts told her one thing: the storm wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Partiu dia. The first glimmers of dawn painted the city skyline as Captain Maya Johnson stepped into the airport's briefing room. The atmosphere was charged, a mix of urgency and anticipation. Reporters had already begun gathering outside, their cameras trained on the terminal. The story of Flight 402 had leaked, and the media frenzy was building. Mark Turner entered moments later, carrying a stack of files. "We've got updates," he said, setting the files down on the table. "Local authorities found Jacob Ellison at the motel. He's in custody, but he's not talking yet. Preliminary searches suggest he may have ties to a fringe group." Maya's brow furrowed. "What kind of group?" Mark hesitated. "Anti-aviation extremists. Their manifesto includes disrupting commercial flights to undermine public confidence in air travel." Brian Miller, seated nearby, let out a low whistle. "That's bold and reckless." "Reckless or not, it nearly worked," Maya said, her voice steady but grim. "Do we have any evidence tying Ellison to others?" "Not yet," Mark admitted, "but we're digging through his phone records and online activity." Meanwhile, in the terminal lounge, Sharon Davis worked tirelessly to keep the passengers informed and calm. The tension in the air was palpable as whispers of sabotage spread. Sharon's experience taught her how quickly fear could spiral into panic, and she was determined to prevent it. She approached Thomas Caldwell, who sat quietly in a corner, his arms crossed. "How are you holding up, Mr. Caldwell?" she asked. Thomas gave a wry smile. "Better than most, I'd say, but I can feel the storm brewing." "What do you mean?" Sharon asked, lowering her voice. "Word gets out about sabotage, and the media's going to have a field day," Thomas said. "People won't just be asking about who's responsible. They'll be questioning if it's safe to fly at all." Sharon nodded, her concern mirroring his. "Captain Johnson is already under enough pressure. The last thing we need is for this to spiral further." Thomas leaned forward, his expression serious. "Then you better hope she's as good with the media as she is with that plane." Back in the briefing room, Maya prepared herself to face the inevitable press conference. Mark handed her a stack of prepared statements, but she set them aside. "I'm not reading from a script," she said firmly. "The public deserves honesty, not rehearsed lines." Mark raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. "Just remember, they'll try to twist your words. Stick to the facts." Maya nodded, adjusting her uniform. As she stepped onto the makeshift podium, the room erupted in flashes of light and a flurry of shouted questions. "Captain Johnson, was this an act of terrorism?" "What steps is the airline taking to ensure passenger safety?" "Do you believe the crew was targeted?" Maya raised her hand, and the room quieted. Her voice was steady and clear as she spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, my priority has always been the safety of my passengers and crew. Yesterday, we faced an unprecedented situation that required decisive action. Thanks to the teamwork of my crew and the professionalism of ground personnel, we were able to land safely. The investigation is ongoing, and we are cooperating fully with authorities to uncover the truth." Her measured response drew murmurs of approval, but the questions didn't stop. A reporter from a major network stood. "Captain, how do you respond to allegations that the airline ignored safety protocols, allowing this incident to occur?" Maya's jaw tightened. "The safety of our passengers is paramount. Every protocol was followed. If someone exploited the system, we will ensure they are held accountable." The room buzzed with more questions, but Maya held her ground, her composure unshaken. She left the podium to a mix of applause and further flashes of light, knowing this was only the beginning. As the press conference concluded, Sharon met Maya near the terminal gates. "You handled that well," she said with a smile, "but the media's going to keep digging." "They always do," Maya replied. "What matters is that we stay ahead of the story." Thomas Caldwell approached, his face a mix of respect and concern. "Captain, you've got the makings of a leader. Just remember, the real battle isn't just with whoever tampered with that plane, it's with the public's trust." Maya nodded, his words resonating deeply. "Then I'll make sure we win both battles." Later that evening, Maya sat in her hotel room, the weight of the day pressing down on her. Reports from Mark indicated that Ellison was beginning to crack under interrogation, but the details were slow to emerge. Outside, the news cycle continued its relentless churn, with every anchor dissecting the story of Flight 402. As she stared out at the city lights, Maya's phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark. "Ellison mentioned a second phase. We need to talk. Urgent." Maya's heart sank. The storm wasn't over. It was about to intensify. Fatindi. The atmosphere in the operations center was thick with tension as Captain Maya Johnson strode in. Mark Turner was already waiting, his face grim as he motioned for her to join him. Several analysts hovered over their computers, their screens flickering with maps, logs, and intercepted messages. "What do we know?" Maya asked, her voice steady but urgent. Mark handed her a tablet. Ellison finally cracked. He admitted to being part of a coordinated effort. "There's a second phase planned, and it's happening soon." Maya's grip on the tablet tightened as she scanned the contents. "What's the target?" Mark hesitated. "That's what we're trying to piece together. Ellison only mentioned that it involves multiple flights and a coordinated disruption." Maya's heart sank. The scale of the operation was larger than she had feared. "Do we know how they're planning to pull this off?" Mark nodded toward the lead analyst. "Sarah, bring her up to speed." The analyst stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "Based on Ellison's interrogation and the data we've uncovered, it appears they're using insiders, maintenance crews, ground staff, even baggage handlers. They've planted devices designed to mimic routine malfunctions, delaying responses and causing widespread panic." "Devices?" Maya asked, her voice sharp. "Explosives?" Sarah shook her head. "Not explosives. They're tampering with critical systems, hydraulics, avionics, and fuel lines. The goal isn't destruction but chaos. They want the public to lose faith in the aviation industry." Maya exhaled slowly, her mind racing. "How many flights are we talking about?" "At least 5, based on intercepted communications," Sarah replied. "But the exact flights haven't been identified yet." In the terminal lounge, Sharon Davis kept a close eye on the passengers, who were growing increasingly restless. Whispers of sabotage and coordinated attacks had begun to circulate, despite the crew's best efforts to contain the information. Sharon moved between groups, offering calm reassurances. She stopped by Thomas Caldwell, who was watching her with his usual piercing gaze. "The tension's rising," he said quietly. "You can only hold back the tide for so long." "I know," Sharon admitted, "but until we have answers, we need to keep everyone calm." Thomas leaned forward. "Have you heard anything new?" Sharon hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one else could hear. "There's talk of a larger plan, multiple flights, but that's all I know." Thomas nodded grimly. "If that's true, you better hope the captain is ready for what's coming." Back in the operations center, Maya studied the information before her. "What's the plan?" she asked, looking at Mark. "We've alerted the FAA and all major airlines," Mark said. "They're grounding non-essential flights and conducting immediate inspections on high-risk routes." Maya frowned. Grounding flights will cause chaos on its own. People will panic. Mark nodded. It's a calculated risk. Better to face public frustration than the alternative. Agreed, Maya said. What about Flight 402? Are we a target again? Mark hesitated. It's possible. Ellison mentioned your flight specifically during interrogation. It seems you were their test case. Maya's stomach tightened. So this isn't just random. They're targeting us. As the sun began to set, Maya joined Sharon in the terminal lounge. The passengers were still milling about, their patience wearing thin. Sharon approached her, concern etched on her face. They're getting restless, Sharon said. If we don't give them answers soon, we're going to have a situation. Maya nodded, her mind working through the possibilities. Keep them informed, but don't let them know the scale of the threat. We can't afford a panic. Thomas Caldwell approached, his expression serious. Captain, I hear you've got a bigger problem on your hands. Maya met his gaze, appreciating his straightforwardness. You're not wrong. Then you'd better act fast, Thomas said. People can handle a lot, but uncertainty isn't one of them. Late that night, Maya sat in the quiet operations center, staring at the map of active flights. Each blinking dot represented lives in the air, dependent on the integrity of the systems below. The weight of responsibility was almost suffocating, but she refused to falter. Her phone buzzed and she glanced at the screen. It was another message from Mark. We've intercepted a new communication, details incoming. Maya steeled herself. The storm wasn't just intensifying, it was here. The airport's interrogation room was sterile and dimly lit, with a single overhead light casting harsh shadows across the table. Jacob Ellison sat slumped in his chair, his hands cuffed and his face pale. Mark Turner leaned against the wall, watching as Maya entered the room. Her expression was unreadable, her uniform crisp and authoritative. Mr. Ellison, Maya began, her tone calm but firm. We know there's more to this. You've already admitted to being part of the first phase. Now tell us about the second. Ellison shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting around the room. I've told you everything I know, he muttered. No, you haven't, Maya said, stepping closer. Her eyes locked onto his. Lives are at stake. If you cooperate, we can help you. But if you hold back, the consequences will be on you. Ellison hesitated, his breathing quickening. It's not that simple. They'll come after me. After my family. Maya's voice softened slightly, though her resolve remained. We can protect you, but only if you give us the information we need. Mark stepped forward, placing a folder on the table and flipping it open. Inside were photos of the tampered access hatch, the intercepted messages, and a list of names. We already know you're working with a network, we just need confirmation. Ellison stared at the photos, his hands trembling. Finally, he exhaled shakily. Okay, I'll tell you what I know, but you have to promise. My family stays safe. In the terminal lounge, Sharon was doing her best to maintain calm among the passengers. Thomas Caldwell stood nearby, quietly observing the crowd. The whispers of sabotage had grown louder, and tension was palpable. This isn't sustainable, Thomas said quietly as Sharon passed by. You can't keep them in the dark forever. I know, Sharon replied. But until we have solid answers, we can't risk causing a panic. Thomas nodded, though his expression remained concerned. Just be ready for when it boils over. As Sharon moved to calm a particularly agitated group of passengers, she glanced back at Thomas, noticing his furrowed brow. His demeanor suggested he was calculating the risks, his military instincts undoubtedly kicking in. She couldn't help but feel reassured by his presence, even amidst the chaos. Back in the interrogation room, Ellison began to talk. He detailed the network's plans, how insiders were recruited, how tampering was carried out, and how the second phase involved coordinated malfunctions across multiple flights. "They call it grounded wings," Ellison said, his voice trembling. "The goal is to paralyze air travel for a day, maybe longer." Maya frowned. "And the flights? Do you have specifics?" Ellison nodded. "They're targeting flights leaving major hubs, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, but the exact times and numbers, I don't know. They don't tell us everything." Mark exchanged a glance with Maya. "We'll need to cross-check this with the FAA and get ahead of it." Maya nodded, standing. "Good. But this isn't over. If there's more, we'll find it." As they left the room, Maya paused for a moment in the hallway, her thoughts racing. She clenched her fists, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily on her shoulders. The lives of thousands depended on the next moves she and her team would make. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself. There was no room for hesitation. In the terminal lounge, Sharon noticed a young mother struggling to keep her toddler calm amidst the growing tension. She knelt beside them, offering a kind smile and a few reassuring words. The mother's gratitude was evident, and it reminded Sharon why she did this job, to provide comfort in moments of fear. Thomas watched the interaction from a distance, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Compassion goes a long way in times like these," he muttered to himself. Then, as if remembering something, he walked over to Sharon. "If there's one thing I've learned, it's that people need a leader they can trust. You and your captain are doing more than just keeping this together. You're giving them hope." Sharon nodded, her resolve strengthening. "Hope might be all we have right now, but it'll have to be enough." As they returned to the operations center, Maya's phone buzzed again. It was another update from the analysts. New names linked to grounded wings, coordinating with federal agencies. The storm was no longer just on the horizon. It was here, and Maya was at the center of it. Steeling herself for the battles ahead, she glanced at the map of blinking flights and whispered, "Not on my watch." The hum of activity in the operations center reached a fever pitch. Analysts scrambled to update maps, mark high-risk flights, and coordinate with the FAA. Captain Maya Johnson stood at the center of it all, her commanding presence steadying the chaos. She scanned the latest reports, her mind processing every detail with razor-sharp focus. Mark Turner approached, his face drawn but determined. "We've identified 3 flights with confirmed tampering. Crews are inspecting them now, but there's one we can't delay. It's already airborne." Maya's heart clenched. "Which one?" "Flight 605 out of Los Angeles," Mark replied. "It matches the profile Ellison gave us. If they've sabotaged it, the clock is ticking." Maya turned to the lead analyst. "What's their altitude en route?" "They're cruising at 35,000 feet en route to New York," Sarah said, her voice tense. "We've sent an emergency message to the pilot, but communication is patchy." Maya's jaw tightened. "We need to act fast. Patch me through to air traffic control." In the terminal lounge, Sharon Davis addressed the passengers, her voice calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. Our team is working tirelessly to ensure your safety. Please remain seated and await further updates." She caught Thomas Caldwell's eye as she stepped away from the microphone. "How do you do it?" he asked quietly. "Stay so calm under pressure?" Sharon offered a faint smile. "It's not about staying calm. It's about making sure they see hope, even when I don't feel it myself." Thomas nodded, his respect for her deepening. "You're doing more than that. You're giving them something to believe in." As Sharon moved to speak with a group of nervous passengers, she noticed a young child clutching a toy plane. The child's mother looked visibly distressed, her gaze darting between the departure board and her phone. Sharon knelt beside them, her voice gentle. "Are you doing okay?" she asked. The mother hesitated before replying. "My husband's on a flight. I'm scared something might happen." Sharon placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're doing everything we can to make sure everyone is safe. Your husband is in good hands." The child held up the toy plane. "Is my dad flying one like this?" he asked innocently. Sharon smiled warmly. "Yes, just like that. And we're going to make sure it lands safely, okay?" Meanwhile, Maya was in direct communication with the pilot of Flight 605. The connection crackled with interference, but the captain's voice came through. "This is Captain Reynolds of Flight 605. We're experiencing fluctuations in our hydraulic system. Control feels sluggish." Maya's voice was steady. "Captain Reynolds, maintain current altitude. We believe there may be tampering. Prepare for an emergency landing at the nearest airport." "Understood," Reynolds replied, his tone professional but tense. The minutes stretched into eternity as the team monitored the plane's descent. Sarah updated Maya on the ground crew's readiness. "They're standing by in Denver. If the tampering is severe, they'll need to act immediately once it's on the ground." Mark approached Maya, lowering his voice. "This is it, Captain. If this works, we can stop the rest before they escalate." Maya nodded, her eyes never leaving the screen. "We don't have room for failure." Flight 605 touched down in Denver with a jarring thud, its hydraulic system barely holding. Emergency crews swarmed the plane as passengers evacuated, shaken but safe. Maya let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Mark's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the message. "It's confirmed. The tampering matches the pattern. We've grounded the other flights in time." A ripple of relief swept through the operations center, but Maya's expression remained serious. "This isn't over. We need to ensure this network is dismantled for good." Hours later, as the sun rose over the city, Maya stood outside the terminal, the weight of the past 24 hours pressing down on her. Sharon joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You did it," she said softly, handing Maya a cup. Maya shook her head. "We did it. Everyone played their part." Thomas approached, his gait slow but purposeful. "Captain, you've earned more than a few stripes today. You didn't just save lives. You restored faith." Maya smiled faintly, looking up at the horizon where planes soared into the sky. As the first rays of sunlight touched her face, she allowed herself to reflect. The image of Flight 605 safely touching down replayed in her mind, a reminder of what determination and teamwork could achieve. The crisis may have ended, but Maya knew her work was far from over. This victory wasn't just about grounding a dangerous plot. It was about proving that unity, courage, and determination could overcome even the greatest of challenges. Maya Johnson's story became more than a testament to leadership under pressure. It inspired countless others to believe in the power of collaboration and accountability. Her actions reminded everyone that ensuring safety isn't just a job. It's a commitment to those who trust their lives to the skies. As she gazed at the planes soaring against the rising sun, Maya whispered to herself, "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning of flying higher, together." Maya's journey serves as a powerful reminder that change begins with unwavering dedication and small, courageous decisions in critical moments. If you were in Maya's position, how would you respond to a situation where the stakes were this high? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and share this story to inspire others and spread the message of hope, leadership, and resilience. Subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more powerful and uplifting stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.